Assalamu alaikum everyone. I'm Omar Layth, year 2. I'm going to explain about the autonomic nervous system innervation, particularly for the GIT. Now our objectives for today is that we're going to talk about the sympathetic innervation, explain the concept and the idea. Then we're going to talk about the parasympathetic innervation. Then lastly, we'll talk about the referred pain. Now, does this remind you of anything? Last year, Dr. Razwan lectures, physiology, exactly. Now, as we can see here, we have the autonomic and somatic innervation. Let's leave the somatic, we'll focus on the autonomic. The autonomic innervation, sympathetic and parasympathetic, it consists of two main neurons, a preganglionic neuron and postganglionic neuron. They synapse together at the autonomic ganglion. The preganglionic, it arises from the CNS, either the spinal cord or the brain. It goes till it reaches the autonomic ganglion, synapse with the postganglionic neuron. Then it goes to the effector organ, which can be liver, intestines, heart, bladder, and eyes. Now, the autonomic nervous system divides into two parts. What are they? Sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now, they differ in many stuff. But one of the stuff is that the sympathetic innervation, the preganglionic, is short, and the postganglionic is long. So the ganglia, because the preganglionic is short, the ganglia is located near the spinal cord, around the spinal cord, called paravertebral region. أما بالنسبة للparasympathetic nervous system, the preganglionic is long, postganglionic is short. Exactly. So the ganglia is located near the effector organ or inside the effector organ. Okay. So now we will begin with the sympathetic nervous system, which has another name called the thoracolumbar division. Now, why is it called thoracolumbar? We have a picture of the spinal cord. Now, it's called the thoracolumbar because only the thoracic and part of the lumbar region give rise to the sympathetic innervation. From T1 till L2. This is the part of the spinal cord that give rise to the sympathetic preganglionic fibers. Now, if we zoom in a bit in this portion, as you can see here, from T1 to L2, the portion between T5 and L2 give the sympathetic innervation for the GIT system. And remember this, T5 to L2. From T1 to T4, we took it last semester, it gives innervation, sympathetic innervation to the heart, lungs, eyes, salivary glands. But we want to focus on the GIT, T5 to L2. And in order not to forget this, what was the last El Clasico score?
5-2.
5-2. Unfortunately, I'm a Madrid fan, so this hurts me a lot. 5-2. T5 to L2. To all my fellow Madrid supporters, I apologize, but I have to. In this way, we won't forget it. Okay? Now, let's suppose that we took a cross section of the spinal cord in that region. What will we see? We will see outside white matter, inside gray matter. The gray matter, it consists of three parts, which are they are the dorsal horn, lateral horn, and ventral horn. Now, what will we find in the lateral horn? In the lateral horn, we will find the cell bodies of the preganglionic neuron, the sympathetic ones, okay? In the ventral horn, we will find the cell bodies of the somatic motor neurons, which innervates the muscles, okay? There are a large number of cell bodies, but we just use 3 to make it simpler. Basically, this is the part that we just discussed. The preganglionic neuron, this is the cell body which arises from the CNS. Now, if we get another picture, this is another cross section. Now, this is the spinal cord. What is this called? ventral root. This is called the dorsal root, which contains the dorsal root ganglia. They join together in order to form what?
Spinal.
Spinal nerve, exactly. What did we say? What do we have in the lateral horn?
The sympathetic.
Exactly, the preganglionic cell bodies of the sympathetic division. We're going to use one in order to make it simple. Now, the autonomic motor neuron will send its action with the somatic motor neuron through the ventral root. Okay? And in the dorsal root ganglia, we have the sensory neuron cell bodies. It has two processes: central process that goes to the dorsal horn, and a peripheral process which goes to the spinal nerve. If we take a cross section of the spinal nerve right here, like we look from the side, we will see large number of somatic fibers, large number of sensory fibers, and large number of autonomic fibers. This is the cross section of the spinal nerve. We want to focus on the autonomic fibers. Now here is another picture of the spinal cord. In the middle we have the spinal cord right here. Now what do you notice on each side of the spinal cord? There is like a chain, okay? A number of ganglia. These ganglia are called the paravertebral ganglia. Para means near. On each side of the spinal cord, we have ganglia throughout the length of the spinal cord that are connected together. So they give the appearance of a ladder. So think of it like this. We have the spinal cord. On each side, we have a ladder, which is the sympathetic chain ganglia, and also on the other side. Now, these ganglia, are they connected to the spinal nerves? So we have the spinal nerve right here, and we have the ganglia right here. Are they connected with each other? They must be connected, because we have the autonomic fibers right here. How will they go to the ganglia? They are connected by two routes. The first route is called the white communicant, which brings fibers from the spinal nerve to the ganglia. Okay? And it is white. Why do you think it's called white communicant?
Made of white matter.
Because of the myelination. It contains myelinated accents. That's why it gets the appearance of white. And if we have from the spinal nerve to the ganglia, we have the opposite route. The opposite route is called the gray communicant. It brings fibers from the sympathetic chain ganglia to the spinal nerve. And why is it gray? No myelination. It doesn't have myelinated fibers. So if we have another picture, this is what I said. Basically, this is the ventral root, dorsal root. They join together in order to form the spinal nerve. This is the sympathetic ganglia, sympathetic chain ganglia. Do you see these two connections? This is the white communicant, this is the gray communicant. And what do you notice? The ganglia are connected with each other, so they are forming a chain. This is why we call it the sympathetic chain ganglia. Clear? Now, again, we have the cross section of the spinal cord as we discussed. We have the autonomic fibers, large number of autonomic fibers or axons. But the thing is, not all the autonomic fibers go to the same destinations. It follows different scenarios that I'm going to explain. Now we have the first scenario. The first scenario, we have the preganglionic neuron cell body arises from the lateral horn, as we know. It sends its axon to the ventral root, then to the spinal nerve. Then after that, it goes through the white communicant, exactly. It's myelinated. It goes to the ganglia, the paravertebral ganglia at the same level. It synapses with the postganglionic neuron there. Okay? Now the postganglionic neuron is going to send its axon back through the gray communicant, back to the spinal nerve, and into the dermatome or that region. This is the first scenario. Second scenario, the preganglionic neuron from the lateral horn sends its axon ventral root, spinal nerve, enters the ganglia at the same level, it does not synapse at that level. What it does is that it goes up, it uses the elevator, the ladder that we just discussed, in order to reach a ganglia that is situated at a higher level and synapse with the postganglionic neuron there. And the postganglionic sends its action through the gray communicant, then into the spinal nerve at that level. It can even go up. There are multiple scenarios. I'm just giving you the basic principle, okay? This is the second scenario. This third scenario is the opposite. Instead of going up, it goes down. It doesn't synapse with the ganglia at the same level. It goes down and synapse at the ganglia below. Okay, this is the third scenario. Sorry. The fourth scenario is a preganglionic neuron. Now, let's differentiate between something called prevertebral ganglia and paravertebral ganglia. Para means on the sides, around. A prevertebral ganglia, what does pre? In front of the vertebra. Can someone give me an example of a prevertebral ganglia? Celiac ganglia, thank you. Superior mesenteric ganglia, inferior mesenteric ganglia, aortic-renal. So the fourth scenario is that the preganglionic neuron sends its action, ventral root, then spinal nerve, that enters the ganglia at the same level. It does not synapse there. It exits the sympathetic chain ganglia as a splanchnic nerve. And it synapses with the postganglionic neuron at the prevertebral ganglia. Is everything clear? So we all know the scenarios of the sympathetic innervation. Now let's move to the innervation of the GIT. This is the same picture, spinal cord and sympathetic chain ganglia on each side. In the esophagus, now before we talk about the esophagus, what was the rule when it comes to sympathetic innervation? 5-2, thank you. Okay, 5-2, from T5 to L2. Now, we are going to skip the cervical esophagus. We're going to know why. We're going to put it at the end. We will start with the thoracic esophagus, the lower 2/3 of the esophagus. What is written right here? Postganglionic fibers arise from the T2 to T5. Didn't we just say T5 to L2? So it doesn't make sense. Ganglia of the sympathetic trunk. Can someone explain? Exactly. The thing is, focus on the wording. It's saying postganglionic fibers, not the preganglionic. Postganglionic fibers, they are arising from T2 to T5 ganglia, from the ganglia at that level. Then, from where does the preganglionic fibers? From that region. Particularly, البريغانجليونيك يطلعون من T5 to T9. Okay? Spinal segment, the lateral horns. The fibers exit, it does not synapse with the ganglia at the same level, it ascends up till it reaches the ganglia at T2 to T5 levels. Then it synapses there, postganglionic neuron exits and innervates the esophagus. Now if we take one of the neurons, there are many neurons supplying the thoracic esophagus, one neuron only. For example, preganglionic neuron located at T5. يطلع من lateral horn, الأحسن, it does not synapse with the ganglia at the same level. It goes up till it reaches the ganglia at T2 level, synapse with the postganglionic neuron, then sends out the axon. Okay? So this is the scenario that we just discussed. And no, it ascends up, it takes up the ladder. Now, moving into the innervation of the stomach, what is written? Here, the preganglionic fibers, it arises from T5 to T9. So following the rule. As the T5 to T9 segments from the spinal cord via the greater and lesser splanchnic nerves, till it reaches the celiac and superior mesenteric ganglia. Synapse there, the postganglionic fiber يطلعون من الganglia till the effector organ. So, the preganglionic fibers, do they synapse at the sympathetic chain? They do not synapse at the sympathetic chain. They exit as a splanchnic nerve and synapse at a prevertebral ganglia. So in this case, we have T5 to T9 give rise to a greater splanchnic nerve. Greater splanchnic nerve primarily synapse at the celiac ganglia, which innervates the stomach, the duodenum, the pancreas, liver, the spleen, and the scenario that we just talked about, and it does not synapse at the same level ganglia. It goes out as a splanchnic nerve and synapse at the prevertebral ganglia. Now for the small intestines, the sympathetic supply is from T9 to T11 segments, spinal cord segments. Now, we have the lesser splanchnic nerve and greater splanchnic nerve. What did we say about the greater? It arises from what?
T5 to T9.
T5 to T9. The lesser splanchnic nerve, it arises from what?
T9 to T11.
T9, T10, T11. So mainly, the small intestine, it is supplied by the lesser splanchnic nerve. It can be also supplied by the greater splanchnic nerve as well. The same thing with the stomach. It can be also supplied by the lesser splanchnic nerve, but only T10. Okay? Now, the lesser splanchnic nerve primarily synapses with what? With the superior mesenteric ganglion, and then supply the small intestine. The large intestines, lastly, we have it arises. It's supplied by the T10 to L2 segments. T10 to L2 segments via two splanchnic nerves. What are they? Lumbar splanchnic nerve and lesser splanchnic nerve. From where does this lesser splanchnic nerve arise? T9, T10, T11. The T10 and T11 supplies the large intestines through the lesser splanchnic nerve. At least the splanchnic nerve, which arises from T12, we're going to leave it. It does not supply the large intestines. A lumbar splanchnic nerve that arises from L1 and L2, it synapses with what? With the inferior mesenteric ganglion and supplies the large intestine. Now there is something that is really important to mention, is that the lesser splanchnic nerve, it synapses with the superior mesenteric ganglion for the midgut derivative of the large intestine. What is the midgut derivative of the large intestine?
Still the initial 2/3 of the transverse colon.
Exactly. So it includes the cecum, ascending colon, proximal 2/3 of the transverse colon. Okay. However, the lumbar splanchnic nerve, it synapses with the inferior mesenteric ganglion in order to supply the hindgut portion, which includes the distal 1/3 of the transverse, descending colon, and the sigmoid rectum reaching the anal canal. All clear?
Yes.
Now moving into the esophagus. What is written right here? Postganglionic fibers arising from the cervical and T1 region of the sympathetic trunk. This is the sympathetic trunk. We have the cervical ganglia, as you can see here, superior, middle, inferior, and T1. البوستganglionic fibers يطلعون من هالمكان. Now, from where does the preganglionic fibers arise from? It makes sense, right? Following the rule.
T5 to L2.
Sorry?
T5 to L2.
T5 to L2 because it's part of the GIT, right? Actually, there is a debate. There is a debate when it comes to this. I searched about it. Some sources are saying that the preganglionic fibers, they arise from T5 to L2, considering that the cervical esophagus is part of the GIT, right? However, other sources are saying that the cervical esophagus is part of the neck. It's an exception. They are saying that it is an exception. البريغانجليونيك يطلعون من T1 to T4. So, what do we need to know? We need to know what's written on it. Just know in the postganglionic fiber يطلعون من cervical and T1 ganglia. This is just fun fact to open your minds and to gain more knowledge. So this is another picture. T5 to T9 give rise to what?
Greater splanchnic.
Which mainly synapse with which ganglia?
Celiac.
Celiac ganglia supply the
Foregut.
foregut, exactly. Stomach, part of the duodenum, pancreas, liver, spleen. T10 and T11, including T9, give rise to what?
Lesser splanchnic.
Which synapse with what?
Superior mesenteric.
Superior mesenteric, which supplies what? The midgut. Lumbar splanchnic nerve, it arises from L1 to L2, synapse with inferior mesenteric ganglion, which supplies the hindgut portion. Yeah, of course. Now moving into the parasympathetic. Everything clear with the sympathetic innervation?
Yes.
Now for the parasympathetic innervation, it has another name called the craniosacral. It has a cranial division and it has a sacral division. This is another picture. The brain, the spinal cord. A cranial division, cranial nerves. It arises from the brain. When it comes to the GIT, we focus on the vagus nerve. A sacral division, S2, S3, S4, through the pelvic splanchnic nerve. Clear? This is the parasympathetic as we discussed. The preganglionic is long, postganglionic is short. The ganglia is located at the organ or near the organ. Now starting with the esophagus. The cervical esophagus is supplied by what?
Vagus.
Vagus, particularly. The branch of the vagus. It is supplied by the recurrent laryngeal nerves that arises from the vagus nerve. The thoracic esophagus, it is supplied by the vagus. But to be more precise, the vagus nerve with the sympathetic fibers, it forms esophageal plexus around the esophagus, which then supplies the esophagus. So it begins as right and left vagus nerve. It forms the esophageal plexus, and in the end, at the abdominal esophagus, it goes back to right and left vagus nerve. This is important to know. Why? Because with the innervation of the stomach, the left vagus nerve goes anterior to the stomach, and the right vagus nerve goes posterior. The left vagus forms the anterior vagal trunk. The anterior vagal trunk, it gives branches to the fundus, it gives branches to the body, and it gives a branch called the anterior branch of lethargic that supplies which region? Pyloric region. And it gives the hepatic branch. For the posterior vagal trunk, it goes behind, as we said, it gives branches to the body and the fundus. It gives the posterior nerve of lethargic. It supplies which part particularly?
The sphincter. Or not the sphincter.
It does not supply the sphincter. The antrum. It supplies the pyloric antrum. And it gives the celiac branch. Then the hepatic branch from the anterior. The celiac branch from the posterior. Now, for the small intestines, parasympathetic vagal. Very simple. Large intestines, innervation مالتها, we also going to divide it into mid-gut and high-gut portion. The mid-gut portion of the large intestine, which includes the ascending colon, cecum, the proximal 2/3, is supplied by the vagus nerve. However, the hindgut portion, the distal 1/3 of the transverse colon, the descending colon, and the sigmoid is supplied by the pelvic splanchnic nerve. From where do they arise, pelvic splanchnic nerves?
S1, S2, S3.
S2, S3, S4.
S1.
S2, S3, S4. Thank you. Now we finish with the parasympathetic. Let's move into the referred pain. Before we get into that, we need to do a bit of revision of what a sensory neuron is. Now, as you can see here, we have a picture of a sensory neuron. It is a pseudo-unipolar neuron. What is this part? Sorry? Cell body, exactly. This is the cell body that is located at the dorsal root ganglia. You remember the dorsal root ganglia, right? It sends an axon that divides into two processes, a central process and peripheral process. The central process, where does it go?
CNS.
To the CNS, to the spinal cord, the dorsal horn particularly, or the dorsal tract. This is the central process. The peripheral process, however, it goes either to the skin, supplying the dermatome, or the organ, like for example, the stomach. Now the idea of referred pain is that when we have two sensory neurons, two first order neurons synapsing at the same second order neuron. So if there is pain coming from this neuron, the body, the brain, it does not distinguish if it's coming from this neuron or this neuron. It just got a message and there is pain from the second order neuron. It doesn't know if it was from that or this. So it's going to interpret it as pain from both. This is the idea of referred pain. What's written right here? When somatic and visceral pain fibers converge on the same second order neuron in the spinal cord. Now what does that mean? Back to this picture. This is what? The spinal nerve. If we take a cross section of the spinal nerve, what will we see?
Autonomic.
Somatic fibers, autonomic fibers, sensory fibers. Clear? We're going to focus on the sensory one. Now, what about this? This is called the splanchnic nerve. It's an autonomic nerve. What is written right here? Can someone read?
Autonomic nerves also have sensory neurons.
Exactly. The autonomic nerves also have sensory neurons. Splanchnic nerve is an autonomic nerve, so it contains sensory neurons. So if we take a cross section, what are we going to see? We are going to see only autonomic fibers and sensory fibers. Oh, clear? Now, what do we have here? The dorsal root ganglia, it contains what? What did we say?
Sensory.
Sensory cell bodies particularly. Now, we're going to take two. The first one, the first sensory neuron, is going to send its central process in order to synapse with the second order neuron at the dorsal horn. The peripheral process, it goes to the skin to supply the skin, the dermatome, through the spinal nerve, this part. Okay? Now, another sensory neuron is going to send its central process to synapse at the same second order neuron. But it's going to send its peripheral process through the great communicant, because sensory neurons, they are non-myelinated, through the ganglia and through the splanchnic nerve, giving rise to these sensory fibers. Clear? Now, both of them, they converge at the same second order neuron. So if we, for example, let's suppose that this is like the stomach. What is the sympathetic innervation of the stomach? Celiac ganglia, but from which level of the spinal
T5
cord?
to T9.
T5 to T9. Let's take T9 for example. This is the level of T9. The sensory neuron that goes to the skin supply the T9 ganglia, T9 dermatome. Okay. Let's suppose that there is an irritation in the stomach, like for example peptic ulcer disease. Now the sensory neurons there are going to get irritated. The action potential will be sent in this way till the second order neuron. Now the second order neuron will go to the brain. Now the brain, it will not differentiate if the pain is coming from the splanchnic nerve or the spinal nerve. So it's going to translate it as pain for both. So this is why when we have pain in the stomach, we feel it at the T9 dermatome. You get the idea? It's clear? Now, this is another picture that just summarized everything I said. Here they use the intestines. And moving to the organs, the esophagus, afferent visceral pain travel via sympathetic fibers. The referred pain is from T1 to T4 or 5. So if we have irritation of the esophagus, we're gonna feel the pain at T1 to T4 dermatomes in this region. Okay? For the stomach, as we said, T6 to T9. So if we have pain in the stomach, irritation in the stomach, we're gonna feel the pain at dermatomes, T6 to T9. So in that region. Okay? And here is a picture showing us that referred pain of the foregut is at which region? Epigastric region. Mid-gut, umbilical region. Hindgut, hypogastric or pubic region. Last thing we're going to talk about is appendicitis. Now appendix is part of what?
The large intestine.
Large intestine, midgut, low, hindgut. Midgut. Now the midgut is supplied by which splanchnic nerve?
The
Lesser splanchnic nerve. From where it arises?
T10, T11.
T9, T10, T11. If we have inflammation of the appendix, the referred pain is going to be at the T10 dermatome, because lesser splanchnic nerve arises from T9, T10, T11, and it supplies the appendix. So if there is pain right here, it's going to be referred at the T10 dermatome, at the umbilical region. Everything clear?
Yes.
Do you have any other questions? Thank you so much for listening. This is for the feedback for. Appreciate you for listening. Thank you all.